Man, what could we do? What kind of video could we do? I mean, there's like top 5. We did vampires. We could do zombies. We could do best horror movie farts.
We get to carry it on and plan the sequel. Cause let's face it, baby, these days, you gotta have a sequel. Ho-ho!
So what up, you horror hounds? Bobo here with my bro Andrew.
Yo, yo.
We got another list coming for you. We're going to narrow this one down to just a top 5, though. Thinking of all ones to do, we couldn't think of, we did top 10 vampires. I thought about doing werewolf stuff, but that was honestly kind of hard to think of a ton of werewolf films. And so we decided to do top 5 horror sequels.
That's right. Hey, that's a cool shirt you got.
Oh, yeah, you see that? Lake Court, baby girls?
Is there a sequel to that?
No, but there's a sequel project coming up by the film production company.
Oh!
So, with this one starting off, we're going to do just like last time. We're both going to give you our top 5s and see if any of them match up or not. And if they do, cool. And if not, then you actually get a top 10.
Aha!
So, let's get this bitch started.
My number 5 is Exorcist number 3.
Oh! Man, that has got one of the greatest scare moments ever.
Absolutely it does. That moment in the hospital with a nurse going back and forth from room to room, and then suddenly out of nowhere,
that nun comes out with the
like the
garden shears.
That's basically what it is. Yeah, it's crazy. And listen, The Exorcist number 1 is widely seen as like the greatest scary movie, horror movie of all time.
Or the scariest.
The scariest. Exorcist number 2 is far from that. And I think,
terrible.
Yeah, and I think that number 3, with the great performances, that moment we were just talking about.
Brad Dourif is great, and then with that nun scene. I mean, that alone.
Yeah, I just think it revived. I think it kind of redeemed what was so awful about part 2. And so, I mean, just for me, that's number 3, or Exorcist number 3 is a better sequel than 2.
Hands down, The Heretic, The Exorcist 2. One, it had nothing to do with the first movie at all. It just had Linda Blair in it. And what's cool about the third one is it doesn't try to focus on the whole Linda Blair thing, and it actually takes the story of what was going on from part 1 and keeps that going further while turning it off into its own little thing. But it feels like it's a story that works. Whereas the second one, it felt like, in my opinion, they didn't know what they were doing, and let's bank off of the success of the franchise. The third one, I remember when it came out as a kid. I remember seeing the previews for it and being terrified of even touching that movie because at that point I didn't even know of The Exorcist 2, and I'd seen The Exorcist.
Right.
And The Exorcist was pretty jacked up for me at that point.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Now it's gotten older over time. It's still jacked up, but it doesn't quite do what it did for me as a kid. I think there's some scarier stuff out there now.
You're right. And I didn't watch Exorcist 2 immediately, and I didn't watch Exorcist 3 immediately. But when I did, I was like, oh, The Exorcist 3 is 3 times better than part 2.
Oh,
which is really not something you say often.
No, usually the part 3 is the one that misses.
Right.
Usually the part 2 does pretty good, actually, and then the 3 is the one that misses. And there's one that I'll put on an honorable mention here in a second, or it could tail off of something depending on what movies come up. My number 5, and you might say, why is it so low on the list? Just these ones that are higher I like better. Evil Dead 2, directed by the great Sam Raimi, starring the great Bruce Campbell, who just gets cooler with age, in my opinion.
Absolutely he does, man.
Evil Dead 2, sure you guys have seen it, but if you haven't, and if you've seen Evil Dead 1, maybe you haven't. But the whole thing with Evil Dead 2 is they pretty much continue Evil Dead 1, but it's almost more like a retelling of Evil Dead 1 the way they wish they could have done it.
With more money.
But they also add to the story of... So basically, Evil Dead 2 is Evil Dead 1 with extra stuff added to the story, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And it's got more comedy added. Well, it's still not a comedy. It's got way more. Whereas the first movie was a lot just kind of terrifying. This is where you start to get to see a little bit more of that charming one-liner Ash. The whole, like, groovy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Groovy.
And the fact that you have a horror icon who's not a villain, and he's returned for multiple movies and for an entire show, had video games. People know Ash in the horror community, and he's a good guy. And that's the only one that exists. There's no other good guy horror icon out there besides Ash. You might have had some attempts, but nothing that stood the test of time like Ash has. And so I love Army of Darkness. I love Evil Dead. I love Ash vs. Evil Dead, the show. But for me, I feel like that not only is it the best sequel out of that entire franchise, but it's almost just my favorite one to watch. It's like my go-to.
I kind of think that Army of Darkness is kind of just... It's hard for me to think of Army of Darkness as a part 3 of Evil Dead, because it's just not even the same style. You know, it really is become... That really is a comedy.
Oh, yeah, that is like a comedy that has horror elements.
Right.
Or it's like in a horror background, but it's very much comedy in the forefront. Whereas the comedy was just sort of interwoven with the horror in Evil Dead 2.
Right.
Now, and I'll agree with you, the movie does seem very much a departure from the other two in certain avenues. However, if you watch it immediately after you watch Evil Dead 2, a lot of people always forget that at the end of the Evil Dead 2, he goes to medieval times. It shows him ending up there and being like, no! And so it works if you watch it immediately after. The problem is if you watch, when I watched Army of Darkness, it was a long time after I'd even watched Evil Dead 2. I had forgotten that part at the end of Evil Dead 2. And so when this is going on at the beginning of Army of Darkness, even though they rehash it all at the beginning of Army of Darkness, then all of a sudden he's in the S-Mart, you know, and he's working as a cashier, and it just becomes a comedy immediately.
Well, you would probably kill me for even admitting this or saying it, but I actually watched Army of Darkness first.
Oh, a lot of people did.
So for me, Army of Darkness was my first impression of Ash, and then I go back and watch Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, and I'm like, oh my God, this is the same stuff.
No, yeah, it's you gain more of a love for the character for sure when going back and watching them if you hadn't seen them. And I don't think that I had seen Evil Dead 2 even. I think that I'd maybe seen Evil Dead 1 and not Evil Dead 2, not realizing that I didn't realize what Evil Dead 2 was when I saw it. I thought it was just more like a Halloween 2. Like, here we go again. I didn't know it was going to just like, here's Ash on acid. Here's all this gore that's nuts, and just the acting job that Ash does, or Bruce Campbell does, and the physicality, him flipping himself over and crashing plates on top of his head. I mean, just all of it.
It's epic.
It's so entertaining. Even if you don't like the movie, you just be like, hey, just watch Ash for a little bit in this one. And that really only happens like that in its craziness in Evil Dead 2. Yeah, craziness stuff happens in Ash vs. Evil Dead and in Army of Darkness, and there's some crazy blood splatter scenes in the first Evil Dead, but none of it compares to what goes down in Evil Dead 2, in my opinion.
Yeah. Hey, there's only two things you run around here, pal. That's Jack and shit.
Yeah.
Jack left town.
Jack left town. And here's the deal. Bruce Campbell, if anybody else said that, you might be like, that's a cheesy-ass line. But Bruce Campbell just says it with so much gusto and just juicy delivery. I love Bruce Campbell.
Yeah.
And the guy, just on a little side note, got to play an undead Elvis in Bubba Hotep. So that's awesome. Who gets to say that they get to play an undead Elvis in a comedy parody horror film about Elvis escaping a nursing home with a black JFK? I mean, that if you guys haven't seen Bubba Hotep, check it out. It's hilarious.
All right.
Number 4.
Conjuring 2.
Ooh.
Now, this is not to say, first of all, hey, this list is not to say that it's better than the first one. It's just a sequel that we enjoyed.
This is best horror sequels.
Yeah. And in some cases, for me anyways, some cases, like The Exorcist 3, I thought was better than 2, and I thought it kind of helped that franchise revived it. Conjuring 2, I don't think it helped revive Conjuring 1. I just remember enjoying it more than part 1. I really liked The Nun. I didn't like The Nun movie. I liked The Nun entrance into this into the Conjuring 2. I liked the aspect of the DeFeo family that they were investigating in the 70s from Amityville. I liked the twist at the end when she realizes that the old man ghost is not actually the evil one. He's actually being held back by Valak, who is the demon possessing the nun, or is the nun. I just remember watching it and just remembering enjoying that one more than the first one, or liking it equally.
There's something about that 70s vibe with Ron Livingston and everything in that first movie, and just the way that house is, and way some of those scenes, those original scenes you're seeing go down, and it just There's something about that one I think I like a little better than the second one. One of my problems, and I say problem, it's a very small nitpick, is that I feel like that aesthetically, the house and stuff like that just didn't look a whole lot different than the first one, and the whole idea of that same thing's happening to a girl again. That stuff, not that I didn't like it, it just kind of, I felt like here it's this kind of same story again. But once Crooked Man and Valak, that whole thing with the nun started coming in, that's where
Crooked Man, I forgot about that one. Yeah.
That's where it started kind of really reeling me back in and realizing, oh, James Wan is actually trying to kind of create more of a world of this evil that not just a specific story in The Conjuring. He's trying to set up that this could happen again and multiple times again anywhere. You never know. And so that's what really made me like it about the second one. And I think outside of the house that I said that looked very similar, stylistically otherwise, like with the nun and the scenes with the Crooked Man and all that, like all that stuff, the imagery is fantastic. So I do like that. Honorable mention for me though, I was telling him this earlier, I think personally I enjoy The Devil Made Me Do It, The Conjuring 3, a little better than Part 2. But I love them all. I mean, I own all of them. I think they're great. I love James Wan, by the way, which he didn't direct Part 3, just wrote it. I love Wan. I think he's a great filmmaker. Does he have some that are better than others? Sure, everyone does, but I like what he does with horror.
Yeah, Any time that you see his name come across a horror film, I mean, 9 out of 10 times it's going to be gold.
Yeah, you're going to dig it. My number 4 is going to be one that maybe obscure to a few people, but Psycho 2. Hey, say what you will. Look, this one is, I think, one of the most overlooked sequels. A lot of people think immediately, if it's a sequel to Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, it's got to be trash. And that's not the case. They waited till the 80s, and what they did with it was fully pay homage to Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, but completely extended the pre-existing story that was there. They weren't trying to just rehash. Like I said, they completely pay homage to what Hitchcock laid out and his things, then styles, things that they were inspired from to even become filmmakers. But it's written by Tom Holland, the same guy who directed Fright Night.
Yes.
It took the story further, and it took advantage of that 80s slasher vibe without abusing it. It didn't like turn it into just some smutty slasher. I'm telling you, the story is really awesome, and Anthony Perkins arguably does a better job as Norman Bates in this movie. Like, he seems a little crazier in this movie than he did in the first one.
I think maybe there was. You could argue that's because he'd already been that character once, and he was able to do an even deeper dive into the mind of Norman Bates.
They allowed him to go even further with this character because of what the story lays out, and it has a beautiful Meg Tilly, which is Jennifer Tilly's sister. Mm-hmm. She gets all kind of naked up and down.
Listen, I liked Psycho 2 when I watched it. I just would not put it on my favorite sequels.
So I honestly, I think it's a badass movie personally. I just like what the twist that they do with it and everything. You know, there are people out there too that just don't think that it adds to. But I also think that Psycho 3 and Psycho 4 are enjoyable as well. I think Psycho 3 gets a bad rap.
Yeah, I think they went off the rails after 2.
Hey, to each their own.
My number 3 is Halloween 2018.
Oh! Okay.
It is a sequel to 1978, and it is a sequel that we all deserve. Not to discredit the original Halloween 2, because I think that's actually a pretty good 2, and they could have theoretically had 2018 be after Halloween 2, but they didn't, and that's fine. We talked about this earlier. If you want to pretend that Halloween 1978 and then the true sequel is 2018 and then kills and ends, that works.
That's a storyline you can choose your own adventure with.
Right. 2018, really, I also just think that it did so much for Michael Myers. We hadn't seen him since...
2009 Zombie is when the last time we saw him, Halloween 2.
Yeah, but this is there was just a different rendition. I mean, David Gordon Green, they were trying to go back to the Michael that we knew from 1978, not the Rob Zombie Michael.
Or the Michael that had conformed into by the time he got to part 6.
Yeah.
Which was this cult-driven, weird, satanic...
was not... I mean, it's awful. I know you don't like to hear that it's awful, but it just wasn't good.
Hey, I like those movies for what they are in parts of the movies, but I'm not going to sit here and recommend them to people that don't really love Halloween. You have to be a Michael Myers addict to get anything out of those movies, you know?
Yeah. The idea that he returns after 40 years and the same town is still haunted by what he did. You know, in the very end, you got her screaming, "Let him burn! Let him burn!" I mean, it's really, really good. I really loved what they did.
And before you knew that they were for sure going to do another one after that one, it still has a little bit of a finality to it. You know, you're still just like, oh, burn, and that, look at him, they got him in the cage. Oh, I mean, there's a lot of gratification in that moment as somebody that's like always wanted to see Michael get his shit. Because the best that we've ever seen him get killed up until this point was in H2O, only to find out the next movie that wasn't even him.
Yeah, which that was cute, but come on, no.
So I think that 2018, not only did it bring what we liked about Michael back to the screen, we know little about this shape, but we know that he goes around this neighborhood and he kills people, and kind of just whoever gets in his way. He's just moving forward, and whatever direction he's pointed in, he goes that way, and then, you know, screws people up and kills them. I loved it. I think Jamie Lee Curtis was great. Judy Greer as the daughter Karen. The girl is Allison. Andy Tichak, I think is her name.
All the homages the thrown in there.
Big time.
It was just
the music done by Carpenter and his son. I mean, all of it. Yeah, I love that movie. Ironically enough, my number 3 is Halloween Kills. Which, I gotta say, the only reason I like that movie any better than Halloween 2018 is just because it was double trouble, man. It doubled up on everything that Halloween 2008 brought, in my opinion. It was quicker paced. It was Michael's movie. Halloween 2018 was a lot of Jamie seeing where she is now, learning about who her granddaughter and her daughter, what they're up to, the husband, all that stuff, the boyfriend, everything. But when it's Halloween Kills time, that's Michael's movie, dude. He's slaughtering everybody from the beginning, all the firefighters. I mean, it just, the people next door, everybody that's getting in his way. He kills like 10 people in the last scene, and like the last 20 seconds or 30 seconds. And anyways,
after taking a brutal beating, which they expand on that whole thing.
They do in Halloween Ends, which again, I love that one. It doesn't make the list, but I do love that movie. I enjoyed it. But Halloween Kills, for me, it was referred to as Michael Myers on acid, and it is. You've never seen Michael be able to go that crazy the entire film. And I think it's just one that you don't really have to invest a lot of your thinking into it. You just sort of watching what's going down, because it's a massacre. I mean, the most thought that's in anything, I guess, is when they're at the hospital and you're trying to figure out if this other guy is Michael, which was kind of silly. But other than that, it's just a rampage of Michael wrecking shop. So I love that.
They make it seem as if the whole time is just a lost little boy who wants to go home. And because it ends with him being in his window. And
that's another thing. It added to the lore of what Michael's goals are without adding anything to any sort of backstory or any info on who he is, and actually simplified him more. It's like, oh no, he's not after her or anyone. He just wants to go home. It's like, oh, it even dumbed it down more to me, which makes Michael scary in the first place, is we don't know that much about him. Halloween Kills, man, the music, I mean everything. I can go on about it. Oh, and Anthony Michael Hall. Dude, what a badass is Tommy Doyle. I love it when he's walking out of the bar and that bartender, you hear him in the background, Tommy Doyle gonna fuck him up. Tommy Doyle gonna fuck him up. That's awesome.
I mean, and they really did, aside from Anthony Michael Hall, they really did bring back the actors from 1978.
Like a lot of them, like 3 of them. Lonnie, the girl that played Lindsay Wallace.
Yeah.
Kyle Richards is her name. And then the lady that played the nurse, which I'm drawing
original nurse, who was in a couple of the sequels before, but you're not.
Oh, and Sheriff Brackett, the original sheriff. He's the old the old hospital attendant.
Yeah. I guess for me that was kind of what worked for me for 2018. It's just the town is still reeling from this thing, and then like he said, in Kills, it's just like everything on acid.
Yeah, I understand that it's more of a slasher than any of them. Halloween Kills is. It's like they literally were just like, let's just slash it up. 2018 has a little bit more depth to it. There's a little bit more of a beginning, middle, end type, the whole ride. The same thing with Halloween Ends, whereas Kills is just, here we go. But I think if you're making a trilogy, that's kind of how the part 2 should be.
Yeah.
There we go. There's my part 3. That's interesting. You did 2 Halloween movies for the part 3.
My number 2, Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
Oh, that's a good one, man. That one's a solid one.
Scream gets a lot of praise and critical acclaim because it was kind of both mocking and celebrating the genre at the same time, and it was kind of like quirky and cool and bringing back like the slasher film for a new generation. But that's not Wes Craven's best. His best is Wes Craven's New Nightmare. It was a horror movie about the making of the horror movie that you're watching, and that's just brilliant. And also, you're probably going to disagree, I think Freddy got a bad rap. I don't think it was good for Freddy Krueger to be, as the sequels went on, he became just like the jokey, is he a bad guy or is he a jokester who's going to kill you? He just became not scary anymore.
That's true.
It became more gimmicky and one-liners and what can he do to be funny while he kills you, and that's not menacing. I think that Wes Craven's New Nightmare, it brought back what was scary and menacing about Freddy. There's only 2 deaths in the whole thing, but what it was doing, the artistry behind the whole style of the film, Heather Langenkamp playing herself, Wes Craven playing himself.
God, I had a huge crush on her, and when that movie came out, like specifically in that movie, I was like, God, she's fun.
And then the nightmare of what's happening to her son, and then,
he's the scariest part almost. And not that Freddy's not scary, but like the whole movie is really scary. But I remember like him with them knives when I was that freaked me out.
Man, what is it with that kid? He was in Pet Sematary too.
Yeah, as a little kid.
Yeah.
And again, that actually was on today with the scalpel. He's like, I can have something for you, mommy.
So, anyways, man, I mean, I think that's a masterpiece of Wes Craven at his best, and I think that also kind of brought back what for 6 sequels what we were missing from Freddy.
While I have love in my heart for all of the ludicrous and ridiculous Nightmare on Elm Street sequels that exist, I do agree with what you're saying as far as bringing the fear back with Freddy. Bringing Freddy back as a monster is someone that you don't... It got to the point to where you couldn't wait for him to get on the screen. And it's like, all right, what sort of one-liner? And you're like, wait a minute. Am I paying tickets for the Tonight Show here, or am I paying tickets for a horror film? And so with Wes Craven's New Nightmare, I remember having a feeling of dread just when the movie started, because I was immediately had this feeling like, all right, this ain't Freddy's dead. They're going back to something here. And I had known that Wes was doing it, and I'd seen some TV previews and stuff like that, but once I got into the theater, and once you see an actual image of Freddy, it's the darkest looking Freddy that's ever been on screen. It's this weird, he's got like a trench coat at this point.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And it's much more like a demon devil type Freddy than it is like...
a burn face.
And it is burn, but it's more of like, it's not blistery burn.
Yeah,
It's interesting, but they definitely did a good job of it. There is a little bit of a 90s dated vibe at certain aspects of the film, but I also really love that. When the kill scenes happen, even though there's only 2 of them, they are horrific. The way it goes down with the little boy watching like the girl, and they're repeating the kill from the first one. He's got her on the ceiling, and he's all watching it. Like, his face alone, his delivery as a kid, delivering the fear, makes you more afraid of what's happening. So I do love New Nightmare. I think it's awesome.
Well, it's just also that last scene is Heather Langenkamp reading. She's basically reading from the script of the movie you're watching. I just think that's clever and it's cool.
It is.
And it's creepy.
It was meta before anything was being meta.
It was meta, dude. That's the word. It was meta. A lot of people think Scream is a meta. Wes Craven's New Nightmare is. It's the first one.
Oh, it almost gave permission for Scream to do its thing. In a weird way. I would arguably say that between New Nightmare and Scream, those 2 actually are responsible for bringing horror back into a point of, oh, this isn't just going to be cheesy smut that we're going to laugh at. This is actually a good movie. Like, people were starting to think that because of the boom of the VHS tapes and everything and all this horror that was coming out, people were thinking that every movie was going to be like Sleepaway Camp 3 at this point. You know what I mean? They weren't realizing that, no, there is still plenty of good horror stories left to be told and films to be made. And I feel that Wes, with New Nightmare and Scream, proved that to the industry and to audience members, to realizing, wait a minute, I do remember liking horror. All right, so my number 2. Oh, it's my boy back there. Friday the 13th, Part 4, The Final Chapter.
Ooh.
Which we all know
was
that's a
not
lie.
the final chapter.
Yeah. It actually might be my favorite Friday the 13th, especially to watch. It's my favorite portrayal of Jason. I mean, Derek Mears did a great job in the 2009 one. I'm not going to lie. I love Kane Hodder, and Part 7, Part 8, Part 9, and he's sort of the saving grace of Jason X. But there's something about the way Ted White plays him in Part 4, and I love the director of that movie, Joe Zito, what he does with that movie, just the way Jason moves, feels, the way the tone of the film is. So not only is it my favorite Friday the 13th film to rewatch, it might be my favorite one, but I just think it's the best made. It's got the darkest vibe to it. It really harnesses that 80s camp slasher vibe and just 80s horror slasher at its finest. So for me, not only is it my favorite Friday the 13th to watch, but I think it's hands down the best sequel.
I'll give you that it's a good overall movie. But my favorite sequel, my number one, Friday the 13th Part 2.
Smackle-doodle-doos.
Now, look, it's really just because you don't have Jason if you don't have Part 2. You just simply don't.
True statement.
You don't get to have the remakes. You don't get to have the iconic mask and the potato sack, all of that. You don't have that without Part 2. It's almost like discrediting an original song because you like the remake better, but you don't get that remake without that original.
True.
So that's kind of like my way of thinking. Like, I have to give Friday the 13th Part 2 the ultimate sequel credit because you just don't get anything else without it. It's almost like a sequel/remake because they follow almost the exact same formula that they followed with the success of the original, and nobody was kind of worn out yet with that style of things.
Still had the POV shots going.
And that worked. That worked.
Still had the same score.
Yeah, that worked so well for the first one. You know, they kind of redid what you just saw, but now we're going to make it to where Jason never died, which is... I mean, that was an epic thing at that time. As the sequels went on, they kind of started getting astray from a formula that worked for Part 1 and Part 2, to the point where, I mean, we're talking 7, 8, 9. They're just not good.
Again, just like the Halloween films, the Michael Myers stuff, there's love to be had for those movies if you're a Jason Voorhees addict and you just want as much Jason as you can get. But as far as like legitimate, incredible films, for me, after Part 4, they aren't. But Part 2, still a very credible horror film, and it still was paving the way for the It was right when that slasher boom where people were just loving it, and it did bring us Jason.
Yeah, so I've got to give it my number one because of that.
You also got the hillbilly Jason in there, which is he's got the freaking bag over his head and the flannel shirt under the overalls and everything. Yeah. So that's a little different. He runs real fast, and we also get to see that Jason is still really jacked up underneath there because up until this point, we just had this image of him coming out of the lake at the end, which was a dream.
With a deformed face.
Right. But now that we get to see he is deformed and all jacked up, oh man. And that scare scene was so perfect too because him jumping through the window at the end there and jumping right on, I can't remember her name. I think her name's Gina in real life, but I can't remember her name in the movie. I'm drawing a blank, and I always remember this. But she was a great final girl. She was a great, strong presence in the film. Yeah. She outsmarts Jason. Yeah. She puts on the sweater, and she's like, Jason, Mommy is proud. Your killing's done now.
Yeah, she starts figuring things out, you know, about who he is and his obsession with Mama.
I don't think there's been any other final girl in the franchise that's been that smart or overpowered Jason without having powers like Tina in Part 7 and everything. So I like everything about this movie. I just, from directing style wise and tone, I prefer the fourth one, but there's nothing bad about this one. I love every second of it, and as you guys know if you watch this channel, Jason's my dog. I love him, so I even love him in the bad ones.
Yeah, he's walking around here somewhere. I don't know where he's at.
He's kicking my. Yeah, so I think that's a great number one.
All right, so without further ado.
All right, so my number one, Devil's Rejects.
What?
Yeah, that's right. by the wonderful and uber wacky Rob Zombie. Now, look, one of the reasons I love this movie is that not only is it, I think, a better film just altogether in its entire composition than House of a Thousand Corpses, but House of a Thousand Corpses was just a totally, like, it flipped the script when he did Devil's Rejects. House of a Thousand Corpses was very gothic. It was dark. They wore makeup. They had like seance-y clothes on. You went underneath the house and there was like Dr. Satan and just all kinds of wacky shit, which I loved. Dr. Satan! Yeah. But then when they get to Devil's Rejects, Otis and Spaulding, and it's just a real movie. I feel like it could be people that are just driving down the street over here. They're just driving across country in their van. It's all just in daylight. And Otis doesn't look like this weird, pale, skinny, gothic demon guy. He looks like a hillbilly dude with a beard and everything. And it picks up after House of a Thousand Corpses, kind of, and it's just a really cool thing. And what's great, if you watch House of a Thousand Corpses, then watch Devil's Rejects, you think that, maybe, man, these guys look a lot different. But then if you watch House of a Thousand Corpses kind of after Devil's Rejects, you'll see that it doesn't look all different. It's actually lit different and shot different and filmed in a different way and style and everything. So he actually looks kind of the same. He's got a beard and he's got long blonde hair, but they just film it and light it differently in House of a Thousand Corpses.
And Bill Moseley, I mean, God bless.
Oh, it's Otis. It's
as
menacing.
Otis, what a terrifying performance that guy does.
I am the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's work.
It's so weird because there are moments where you want to like him or laugh at him, and then you quickly realize, like, oh no, he's gonna give me nightmares.
Yeah, there are moments he's literally making you laugh, or like but about when they're driving down the street and she's like, I want some ice cream. She's like, I want some Tutti Frutti, and he's like, there is no Tutti Frutti in your future. Totally. We're not getting any fucking ice cream. And like you're laughing at these psychopathic serial killer family, and then they end up meeting up with Ken Foray at that like little whatever it is that he has, that little compound he has, and then Danny Trejo and all the people come in and kill all the prostitutes, and there's this awesome 70s soundtrack, classic rock soundtrack the entire time, but it's filmed awesomely. I mean, I honestly think it's one of my favorite horror movies. If not, I mean, I know it's a bold statement, but it's not my favorite, just because, tell me when you watch that movie that you're not mortified when it's done. The way it makes you feel, but you're also charmed a little bit too. It was just, to me, it's an excellent horror film. He's not made, I like a lot of his stuff, and I like certain things better than others, but Devil's Rejects to me is, he hadn't made anything on that bar since.
That's an interesting choice of words. You're horrified, yet slightly charmed. That's so like,
yeah, I mean, that's what he does to you, though.
Yeah.
And he hasn't really done that in any other films. Most of the time, he's just sort of gotten to the, like, appall you now with a lot of his films. And I'm not dogging on him, because I like Lords of Salem and stuff like that, but Devil's Rejects just has it all. And you got the William Forsythe character who you're rooting for, but then you start seeing the evil come out of him a little bit, and then there's some twists and turns. I think Devil's Rejects is top notch.
I'll agree that it's a great film. I just didn't think about it being one of my sequels, but, to each his own.
And a lot of people don't view it in their eyes as a sequel because that it's so different than House of a Thousand Corpses. Yeah. But it is a direct sequel. They talk about the events of House of a Thousand Corpses in Devil's Rejects, and they are sort of like picking it right up. Like everybody that died in House of a Thousand Corpses, it's showing them all sitting there, and it's showing Otis like sleeping in his bed. He's in his underwear, and there's like 3 dead girls laying next to him. And you're like, oh, okay. That's what it is. But anyways, I love that movie, and there's our top 10 or our top 5 each, guys. What turned out to be a top 10.
That's right.
Well, that'll do it for this list, guys. Thank y'all for joining us, and I'm glad this was a little bit of a shorter video this time. So join us for the next one. We'll probably have one more breakdown, top 5 of something before Halloween's over with. But as always, if life gives you lemons,
make some hot, fresh popcorn.
Oh shit!